Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Creative James Media YouTube channel. We have another interview for you today, which is why you're seeing my face and not Gene's. Today, we're going to be talking with one of our wonderful authors, Ashley Hawthorne, about her upcoming book, Beneath Calm Waters, which releases this May. Um, we're also going to be covering her love for writing in general, some hobbies, and just a whole smorgasbord of things to kind of give you guys a peek behind the brand, so to speak. So, without further ado, Ashley, how are you?
I am good. Thank you very much for having me. I
Of
am
course.
more relaxed this time, I think, than I have been. If anybody's seen me the last couple of days, it was kind of a little bit of a disaster. I tend to be a little bit tense doing these kinds of things and get a little anxious. But this is my third one of doing an interview with y'all, and I have done some podcasts and stuff in between there. So hopefully I'm adjusting and feel a little bit more comfortable in the hot seat, so to speak.
I try to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah,
Nothing.
I've never had a bad interview, and I think that's gone a long way towards alleviating my anxiety. Everybody's always been extremely friendly and very accommodating and done their best to make me feel welcome, so it definitely helps.
Yeah, that helps when you have good interviewers who know what they're doing and have kind of prepared it a little bit. You can kind of sit back and just answer things as they throw them at you.
Yeah.
Um, for those who may not have heard of you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
All right. Well, I am Ashley Hawthorne, and I am a contemporary romantic suspense author, which means that I like to write books where people fall in love, but also where they are embroiled in some sort of like murder mystery or something along those lines, where you've got a little bit of that suspense element, a little bit of the who done it or what happened kind of thing. And that's just it's come about. I have always had a love for romance novels, and I really like true crime and mystery type things, and I love the fact that I can write in a genre that lets me blend the two of those together. um, I'm really passionate about it. It's not the only genre that I write, but it is the only genre so far that I've been published in. So this is my third um, romantic suspense novel. All of them have come out with you guys, and then I actually have a sequel to this one that's supposed to be coming out next year. So this is the first in a duology for me. That's a first. My first two were standalones. And as far as like me personally, I am a mom to two teenagers. Like I'm almost done with that. With that part of it, my oldest is actually 19, so he's officially grown. My younger is 15, and she's getting ready to start doing all her driving stuff. So I feel like I've kind of worked myself out of a job in that capacity. And I was looking for like, what's my next thing gonna be? What am I gonna do? Because I've been a stay-at-home homeschooling mom the entire time that in fact, yeah, I had my first when I was 18, so I've literally never done anything else. And I wanted to make sure that before they, fled the nest, that I was prepared for the next stage of my life. And I started writing, and now I'm here hanging out with you, doing YouTube interviews for books that I wrote. So, and I guess that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Sounds like a handful. Teenagers.
Yeah, and they are, but I would say I have been super blessed. My kids are absolutely amazing, and we have not had any of the typical teenage headaches, I guess you'd say. They're wonderful kids. I love spending time with them. I have no regrets about spending the last almost 20 years making them my focus, but I did want to make sure that when they were ready to be done with me, that I had a life lined up, and I wasn't one of those clingy moms that was like, no, don't leave me.
Yep. Well, it's good that they turned out good because I remember what I was like as a teenager, and I would not wish that on anybody.
Yeah, same. I worked really. I put a lot of effort into making sure that they didn't feel the need to do some of the things that I felt the need to do as a teenager. So I
Right.
was like, please don't do that.
Although that was a different time for us.
Yeah, it was.
That was a
It
whole
really, yeah, it was a little wild
whole
back when
different
I was a
world.
teenager. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about Beneath Calm Waters.
All right. So actually, I have a funny story, right? I know the first two times that I had done this, I had a copy of the book already, so I was able to like hold it up in front of the camera and be like, "Oh, look at the pretty cover and stuff." And I was thinking about this morning. I was like, "Man, I don't have my author copy of the book yet, so I'm not gonna be able to show people." And guess what showed up? We were doing this. We were supposed to do this interview at noon. Guess what showed up at my house at 11:58?
That is
2
hilarious.
minutes before I was supposed to come on and do this interview, I got my author copy. So please look at my beautiful cover first of all, because I'm very proud of this. We went in a super different direction with this one. My first two were like flowery and like more romancy, and I wanted this one to reflect more of like the murder mystery kind of vibe. So we went a little bit of a different direction. I'm super proud of it. And it's like this one is I guess definitely this one's got a little bit of the who done it aspect to it, because the story kicks off with the death of the main character's grandfather. Grayson had been kind of like on the run from his past and moving around from place to place for the last decade or so. And he gets, the phone call that says, "Hey, your grandpa's dead, and you need to come home and take care of your grandma." So he shows back up and finds out that this drowning happened under what might have been like suspicious circumstances, and now he's kind of stuck taking care of his grandma. And she had a caretaker that was not pleased to see Grayson at all because he'd taken off and left Grandma alone. And I think her first words to him is, "Who the hell are you?" And it kind of goes downhill from there. So we've got a little bit of that kind of like animosity over all the things that have happened. And once he's back in his hometown and living in the house he grew up in, all the stuff that had happened to make him run away and all that kind of tension between him and his grandfather and stuff kind of gets revealed, and we find out that maybe his drowning wasn't an accident, and that maybe his new love interest might have had something to do with it. So I really like being able to kind of pair the two of them. Like, he's falling in love with this woman, but at the same time all these secrets keep coming up, and he's like, maybe she's not as innocent as I would like to believe, and all these things that have happened. So
That definitely sounds like a good read for sure. I mean, it really takes the first time I got a glimpse of it, it really hit me as different because the first book of yours that I actually got my hands on was Death Sentence.
right.
Um, and that it's a whole different direction, but still, I feel like at least a mix of both pieces put together. Um, but this cover is I love this cover. It gives me the vibe of like isolated on the water, but at the same time, you're in the middle of a big storm,
Right.
kind of with everything going on. So, um, you said that you've written things other than romance. Do you think that you're going to try to get any of them published, or are you going to kind of stick with what you know?
I've actually been querying a romantic horror, like a historical horror that's set in like an isolated lighthouse in the 1800s. It's kind of like a ghost story. So yeah, I mean, I really like doing the romantic suspense, and I definitely want to keep publishing that. But I do have story ideas that are kind of like in other areas, and I would love to be like a multi-genre author if I could pull that off. Um, just because I feel like I have a lot of ideas that go in a lot of different directions, and I feel like for me and my personal creativity, I feel more energized when I'm working on projects that are a little bit different from each other. And then if I get a little bit stuck on one, I can work on the other, and then kind of like go back and forth. Whereas if I've only got one project, it's like I get stuck and I can't figure out kind of like how to get out of it. Um, and I figure if I'm doing it anyways, I might as well try to publish it. And I mean, I have no issues with like self-publishing, or I mean, I'm open to avenues. I just kind of exploring my options. Publishing, it feels like it's such a big world, and there's so many different ways to go about doing stuff that I don't think I've ever really like permanently closed the door on any changes that might come up, because I never know what I'm going to do from one day to the next depending on my mood.
Right. And that's the thing too. Publishing is such a huge world that there's going you kind of have to keep your options open while you're kind of thinking about them because you never know what's going to come along. Like we always tell our authors, we would love to take all of your books, but if like a big three or big four comes knocking and wants, to do a huge thing with your book, if it feels right, do it. Because it's your success that is taking you where you want to be, and we're just happy to have had a teeny tiny little part. Um, were there any particular characters in this book that were kind of harder for you to write than others?
Um, I think Becca, who's the female main character in this one, I think Becca was hard for me because I put a lot of my. I feel like every character gets a little bit of me, but the part that I gave to Becca was a hard one for me to deal with because she got a lot of my anger. Just that. I try really hard not to be an angry person, and not to be like super grumpy or super aggressive, but I definitely have like my own personal issues and traumas and that kind of stuff. And I gave her a lot of the struggles that I deal with in that area. So the feedback when the people started, I got those beta readers and stuff, and like, I don't know, she's not really that likable. She seems to be kind of grumpy, and I'm like, yeah, she really is. There's nothing like writing a character you see a lot of yourself in and having people come back and be like, well, I don't like her at all. And they're like, well, thanks. So appreciate the feedback, but a little bit harder to hear when it feels a little bit personal. But and we did do a little bit, I think, to kind of like soften her up, not necessarily to make her less angry, but to give her a little bit more, I think, of reasons for Grayson to kind of see beneath the grumpiness to the vulnerable parts.
Right.
A little bit more connection between the two of them was a heavy part of the revisions and stuff that we did. So I wanted to keep true to that idea that, you know, she's got a lot of trauma and she's got a lot of reasons to be angry while still making her feel like, you know, that's not all of who she is, and she's definitely got those soft parts as well. So um, yeah, but I think she's been actually the hardest one, not just in this book, but like just in general. Like that, she's probably the hardest one that I've ever written, just because
Right.
I feel connected to her in a way that feels really vulnerable to me.
Did what in doing so, did you find that it made by tying some of yourself in her, did you find that easier to write her because of that?
Um, I think, I mean, as far as, you know, finding her relatable and putting myself into her headspace, I definitely do, because I know I've definitely written some characters where it's like I can see where they're coming from based on the positions that I put them in, but they react in ways that are different than I would have reacted. You know,
Right.
I don't think every character is really like a reflection of me. There's definitely some of them where the stuff that they've said or done has been pretty much the opposite of how I would have handled that situation. So it can be a little bit more difficult to put yourself in that headspace and be like, okay, if I was going to react this way, what would my justification be? You know,
Right.
whereas if somebody's really more similar to you, that kind of comes a little bit easier. So it's definitely easy to be like, oh, if I was in this position, what would I do? And that's, you know, that's where she kind of, you know, it is definitely easier, I think, in that aspect.
And I think too, along with that is like when we're writing our books, we're able to kind of play out scenarios that we really wish we could do, or we're curious about what would happen if we did.
Right.
Kind of just, without the consequences of
Yeah,
life
for sure.
by doing so. So I think that's one thing that makes a lot of people's books interesting is they're able to kind of tie those personal elements in, and then it kind of gives more of a you're drawn to that character because you feel the realness. It gives you that something to draw in and kind of continue wondering about it. Like if I keep reading, is she gonna get worse?
Right.
Or is she gonna get her
Yeah.
shit together? Like
Yeah.
which one are we going for? Um, what is your writing process like? Do you have to have it quiet? Do you like to have music or TV on? What's your space look like?
Well, I mean, I do typically write in silence, which I know everybody thinks is super weird, but I usually don't even put on like background noise. I'm definitely a quiet writer. I have a desk space set up that I do not use ever. We've got this like weird little plastic. My house is set up super weird, but I sit at this table behind me right here on the couch with my laptop in front of me, and vibe that way. And you know, I feel like my writing process has changed a lot over time, because I used to be kind of like a pantser, you know, where I just like I had a kind of like a broad overview of a story, but it took me forever to write that way because I could never really figure out like, well, how do I connect these dots. And now I'm a heavy plotter where I go through and I start literally with like a bullet point list of plot points, and then I fill that in. You know, I start with like a three-act structure. You know, it's like, okay, these are the three, you know, the main things, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then I fill that in until I've literally got like pages and pages worth of this bullet point of things that I want to happen. And I will pull a check. I mean, I break that down into chapters. I pull a section of, you know, one chapter out of those bullet points, and then I sit down and flesh that out again. And then I'll actually go through and write the chapter. So it's a very plotted thing in my brain before I ever start writing the story, and it's made the process of writing a lot faster for me because I know what points I need to connect and all that kind of stuff. So the brainstorming part at the beginning is probably the most important part for me to do because it just makes the rest of it so much easier.
Right. It definitely does. You just answered my next question too. I was going to ask you about that because I always love asking authors that question because a lot of the answers that I get are people like, "Oh yeah, I used to be a pantser and then it came back to bite me because X, Y, and Z, and it did the same thing to me too." So for those people, don't feel bad. Like I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna just character names and important places and that's it." And then I was like, find myself having to scroll like 100,000, 200,000 words back to find something that I said
Yeah,
so I could make sure that it stays consistent. And then I'm like, all right, I'm done. We can't do this anymore.
yeah.
We have to change it.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the beautiful things about writing, though. I mean, you start out doing things one kind of way, and then you figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. And I mean, I love the evolution of the writing process and how it looks different for each book, and it's got different challenges for every story, and um, it keeps things fresh and interesting. I mean, I know that seems like you would think that the process of sitting down by yourself in a quiet room to write a book would be boring, but like I'm constantly battling it out with myself to try to get words on the page. So for me, I find it really fulfilling. You know.
It is. I mean, and that's the great thing, though. With everything that you write, you're constantly learning about yourself, and kind of adding and subtracting things to your process, in hopes of your next piece of work being better than the last one, or at the very least, learned some sort of tool to aid you in kind of taking a little bit of stress away from the process. um, this kind of ties into that a little bit, but would you say that publishing your first book kind of changed your writing process at all? Or was it, you'd kind of already been through the metamorphosis of changing the way you do things enough that you're like, okay, this process works.
Yeah, I really think it was actually my second book that made things different for me because I think people that have kind of been following along with my writing stuff know my first book was actually like a reworked fan fiction, where I had sat down and I had done, all this world building for this um, particular uh, couple from a different story. And then I had just kind of reworked all the details for that. Whereas my second book was the one where I was actually creating everything from the ground up. I went into it without any kind of preset ideas for what the characters were going to be like and all that kind of stuff. So having to do that, I think, was the one where I really had to reevaluate my whole writing process because I had to start from a different place.
Yeah, you didn't kind of have that.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
have any of that existing structure, I think, and that so it was like when I sat down to write my second one, it was like everything this time is going to come completely from me, and I'm not going to have anywhere to start. That I was like, oh yeah, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to start that. I don't know what to do or how to begin, and I had to kind of go through and really like figure out what that looked like. I knew how to make a story, but I didn't know how to create an entirely new character out of nothing. Um, so I think that one was actually the one that was super challenging for me. As far as like changes to my writing process went.
right. Do you think, for you personally, would you say um, the world building or the character development is the hardest for you?
I think it varies by story because every story kind of comes to me a little bit differently. Some of them really come to me like setting first, and then I have to try to find characters that kind of go along with that. And some of them come to me character first, and then I have to figure out everything that goes around them.
Right.
I think Death Sentence came to me character first, and you can really tell because the setting just isn't as in depth as it is in some of my other ones. My Lighthouse horror book definitely came setting first. It's like I had the setting, and then I need to figure out like how do I get these people on this deserted island in the middle of nowhere. What kind of people would be there, and how to So I think depending on which one comes first, kind of informs the questions
Right.
that I have to ask about creating the other.
To be fair, though, a lighthouse creates the perfect backdrop for a horror story.
It really
Just
does, yeah.
saying.
It really, really does. It was like such a great idea, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go for
Yeah.
that. So.
Well, like the thing is too is like especially the farther back you go in time, where the lighthouses were more and more crude.
Yeah.
Um, because nowadays the remaining lighthouses around the world, most of them have living quarters. They have a bridge in case tide's high. There was nothing. If the tide got high, you were just there. Good luck. you
You're like, have
know,
fun with that.
right?
Exactly.
Um, when you have time, with what little time you probably have, you keep busy. Who are a few of your favorite authors to read?
Um, it's like the fandom that I came out of has produced a lot of extremely prolific romance authors. So I am very blessed to be able to have people that I know or people whose writing I've been reading since before they were actually published. So my favorites tend to come out of that fandom. I absolutely love Ali Hazelwood and Liana De La Rosa, Tristan Crone, who publishes through a small press and does absolutely wonderful plus size representation for her books. So I've got very many romance authors that I absolutely adore that are putting out fabulous work. Liana De La Rosa has done some beautiful historicals that have Mexican heroines in Britain. during the time of some unrest in Mexico. So um, I absolutely love all three of them particularly. And I'm sure I could go and name you 10 or 12 more, but I spend a lot of time as an author. I do spend a lot of time trying to read because I think that helps me develop my own craft as well as being able to support other authors in their careers. So, um, yeah.
It definitely, it's definitely, I think, at least I've found is that, it's hit or miss whether us as authors, especially if we're continual authors and not like a one and done publish, on whether we actually have a substantial amount of time to read or not.
Yeah, it's
Um,
true.
because I have people who are doing trilogies and they're like, yeah, I basically finished the first one and then I had to go into pretty much straight into the second, and just so you could pump them out to have them all come out in a succession easy enough for people to want to pick up, without forgetting about it and having to do a whole repush of the first and the second. What advice would you give to aspiring authors?
See, I'm full of advice. Like, I think the thing is that for me, I have two main pieces of advice that I usually give when it comes to this question. The first of which is you got to find your people, right? Because you are going to be the one putting butt in the chair and writing the actual story. But if you can make friends in author circles, they're going to be the ones that are going to be able to help you figure out how to market your book, how to query, how to get an agent, how to vet a small press, and just the people that you can go to when you have those inevitable bad days who are going to understand what you're going through, because there's unique pains that come along with the rejection in publishing or bad reviews or whatever, that your friends and family that you've met through other ways, they're going to be supportive, but they're not going to understand exactly what that feels like. Whereas you're going to be able to go to one of your author friends and be like, oh, this thing happened, like, man, yeah, I get it, and that's just kind of like a different sort of solace, I think, when you can talk to somebody that's been there and knows what that's like. So you're going to get, I think, really great support from people who have a lot of knowledge if you make other friends, if you make friends in that publishing space. And I think
Right.
that's a wonderful thing to have. And my second piece of advice is you got to be firm on your goals, but flexible on your methods. You want to get published, that's a beautiful thing. Keep experimenting with your writing process, explore all of your avenues when it comes to publishing. I mean, they may not be for you, but you're not going to know unless you look, so check out what goes into self-publishing, check out some of those small presses, um, and don't get super hung up on the path that you take to get there, because I know everything looks different for me from one book to the next. I may have an absolute set schedule and a perfect writing process for one book, and then I sit down to write the next book and something in my life has changed and that doesn't work anymore. Maybe my husband's work schedule or the kids are doing something different, or I've taken on a new responsibility that now kind of overlaps with that time slot and I can't write there anymore. And you got to be willing to just kind of keep making those changes so that you can keep making progress, because I have definitely gotten into places where I've tried, gotten stuck, being like, well, this is what I need to do, and this is the time I need to do it, and then I've wasted weeks or months being unproductive because I wasn't willing to just face the fact that I need to do something different.
Right.
So,
I think one thing too that everybody needs to remember, no matter what way you're publishing, is that you have to learn not to take the bad reviews seriously. Um,
yeah,
I know, because if any of you are like me, you have a hard time not taking some things personally sometimes, especially if it's your first book. That's your baby. That's a project that you probably poured more years into than any other book. It's your coming out party, so to
right.
speak. It's hey world, here I am, and then to find that somebody doesn't like it, you have to look at it like, do they not just not like the book, do they not like a character, and don't take it all to heart. If it's a critique of, like, oh, this could have been written this way and written better. If you go back and read that and then you're like, oh, yeah, I probably could, then listen, because that's constructive. But don't let every bad review or anything, or people who rate it and don't review it, drag you down, because that's where you're going to spend your time.
Yeah, I generally advise authors to stay off of their Goodreads and stuff. But if you do happen to see, and I think if you're online, you always kind of run the risk of accidentally seeing or getting tagged in, God forbid, a negative review online. That, if something like that happens and it really hits you in your feelings, think of your favorite book, the book that you love the most, the one that you feel like was life-changing for you. And go check out their reviews on Goodreads,
Yep.
because you're going to see one-star reviews for the book that you love more than anything in the world, where people are like, I hate this. This is awful. Everything about it was wrong, and I didn't like the characters. And you realize how subjective those opinions are. I mean, the classic literature that stood the test of time over hundreds of years have one-star reviews being like, yeah, that sucked, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to win them all. It's impossible. Everybody likes different things and wants different things from you. So, you can't get hung up on the negative opinions of every person that has one, because you literally would spend forever chasing after this version of perfection that literally nobody is going to be able to achieve.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things, it's like you'll find the more and more you put yourself out there, not even in just writing, but on your socials and your marketing, things like that, there are going to be people who just do it to do it. They're negative because they want to be negative, and so that's why you just have to, you have to take it with a grain of salt and celebrate the ones that you get. Um, what are a few things that you like about working with us?
I have actually had a really great experience working with y'all. I was terrified of trying to do the self-publishing route, because it was just, I didn't know anything when I was coming into this about marketing or any of that kind of stuff. And the idea of trying to figure out how to promote a book while also trying to figure out editing and formatting and that kind of stuff just was overwhelming to me with that first book. And I didn't have the money to pay somebody up front to do it. I didn't have the financial ability to invest in that kind of stuff or the time to learn it myself. So I definitely knew I didn't want to go that route. And I queried my first book, and the advice, I mean, I had the agents reading the full that were like, it seems great, but I just don't know where I would put this in the market. It makes it really hard. And I think that going with a small press is great for those kinds of situations, because there is more flexibility. There are more small presses are more willing to take risks on books that don't necessarily fit comfortably in the box in the way that some of the bigger publishers want them to. So if you're writing something that seems a little bit weird, a small press may be a great way to go. I have felt really supported when it comes to taking creative risks, and as well as having input on things like my covers. I have been really in love with every single cover that I have gotten, because the process has always been like, tell us what you like, show us examples of things in your genre that you think are representative of what you'd want to see. What colors do you like? So I've never gotten a book where I'm like, oh, that's like an ugly color. And I know that's happened to people with bigger publishers. They're like, oh, here's your yellow book, and they're like, it's my literal least favorite color. Please don't make it yellow. And there was just like no wiggle room there. If I picked a cover and I liked it, and I was like, oh, this is great, but I think that font might be a little hard to read or something. I was like, oh yeah, we'll change it. Not a big deal. And I think that's made me feel really comfortable and felt really heard, because if I've had a concern or something, like, it's always been addressed. I've never had to wait forever to get like an email response back or anything like that. Everybody's always been really quick to like, hey, I have a question. They're answered really quickly. Like it's been for me a good in between place between having creative control versus having all of the responsibility or the financial obligations and that kind of stuff. So it's been like a really kind of a sweet spot in the middle for me that has been I've found really comfortable. So
Right, and that's part of why we do it the way we do as well. Is like, yes, we're publishing this for you, but at the same time, the book is still yours, the rights are still yours, everything is still yours. So we want it to be just as perfect as you want it, because in the end, there's no reason to force something that you don't like, because that can be hard to come back from. Um, from a personal standpoint, from writing your book, because then you're like, why did I take this chance? Why did I try to put this book out there? I'm not going to do another one, or whatever the case is. So it's like, it's important to us that you guys are happy with every little aspect, because it's if nothing about collaboration, because it's your dream. We're just here to help you try and get there with the resources that we have. So um, before we end off today, do you have any events or signings or anything coming up that you'd like to promote?
not right this second. I have done signings at my local Barnes and Noble before, and they're always like, "Let us know when the book comes out, and then we'll schedule you." So it makes it kind of a little bit hard for me to set that stuff up in advance, because they don't want to do it too far out.
Right.
But I think a great way to find out about that kind of stuff for me is to find me on any of the various social medias, because I am on as many of them as I can stand, because everybody wants to be on a different one, and I want to be where you're at. Um, And I always put up, if I do an interview or any kind of thing like that, I always make sure that stuff goes up on my socials. And when I do go and talk to the local bookstore about doing a signing for me, that is where you would find the dates and stuff for that as well. So um, I try to be as active as I can and get as many, podcast interviews and that kind of stuff as is willing to have me. So um, yeah, I'm on, I think, TikTok, as long as we still have it, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
And I will link all of her socials in the description below. So all you guys have to do is click that. You'll be able to check out the book as well as her link tree and find everything she has so you can keep up with what's new. Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it, and good luck on the new book.
Thank you very much for having me. It was another wonderful interview.
Have a great day.
You too.